Thanksgiving at our house brings relatives from around the country. There's a lot of laughter and delicious Armenian food, including my favorite, homemade hummus. But the holiday can be bittersweet for Armenian Americans like us, who give thanks that our relatives survived the first Holocaust of the 20th century, when Armenians faced extinction at the hands of Ottoman Turks. When my Uncle Sam was growing up, Armenia was situated inside the Ottoman Empire, and in the late 1800s, the empire was crumbling. The Muslim Ottomans were being driven out of the Balkans, where their Christian subjects were rebelling. And when the Armenians began to demand better treatment, the Turks responded with a series of massacres that culminated in the Armenian genocide that lasted from 1915 to 1917. Although it is known today as the secret genocide, it was no secret at the time. 30 years before the word genocide was invented, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Henry Morgenthau, reported a campaign of race extermination in progress, as journalists around the world brought back reports of horrific cruelty. Of the 2 million Armenians living under Ottoman rule, roughly 1.5 million men, women, and children were slaughtered or driven to starvation as entire villages were marched into the desert toward modern-day Syria. When it was over, the Armenian population had been essentially erased from their homeland, their churches destroyed, and their land confiscated. Some of my family members escaped before the massacres, but some, like my Uncle Sam, survived the death marches, where he watched his mother, little brother, and grandmother perish somewhere in the desert. After 3 generations, we still know very little about our annihilated homeland, but our ancestors left us some clues. In our family archives, we found a couple of books, written mostly in Armenian, that describe the villages our families inhabited for nearly 1,000 years. We also found a series of maps, some drawn from memory by my great-grandparents, detailing our family villages, including one that appears to show the location of my great-grandmother's house. After spending so many years giving thanks that our family escaped from that part of the world, my dad and his sisters decided to journey back to historic Armenia, now eastern Turkey, in search of their grandparents' homes.
When we started this thing, we knew very little about where in the world we were going.
After a long journey to Istanbul and then on to the Kurdish city of Ilaziz in eastern Turkey, my father and his sisters find themselves in a rented microbus, winding their way through eastern Anatolia in search of the Armenian village of Husinik, which has been literally wiped off the map.
Husinik was changed to Ulukent. That's how I found it on the map. That's how fanatical the Turks are about erasing history. Not only did they kill off all the people, but they changed the name of the village.
By early afternoon, my father and his sisters approach historic Husinik, home to their grandmother Akhavni, and epicenter of the 1915 massacres.
It's such a painful history that I really was afraid of my own reactions of sadness and grief. We had had very little experience with directly confronting this traumatic event that happened to the Armenians.
They became the first Kachadorians to set foot in our ancestral villages in 3 generations.
You turn off the road and go up into this village that hasn't changed in 100 years. It looks just like the pictures in the old books that you saw.
I felt like time had stayed still and that my grandmother could be walking those streets. And she could be 15 years old again.
The villagers appear to be all Turkish, no Armenians, and they do not seem to know anything about a genocide, nor do they recognize any of the Armenian street names on our map. Nonetheless, they seem happy to help my father and his Turkish-speaking guide try and pinpoint the location of our Rustigian family home.
Let's go over this way, see if we find the cemetery, and then go down down here, see if we can find anything that looks like this, this complex here. That was the house. That's Grandma's house. We all walk up to the cemetery.
Our grandmother's grandmother was buried there. Our grandmother's mother was buried there. Father and mother and cousins and everybody, and totally desecrated. Remember, they had been Armenians in Husanik for 900 years. 900 years. There's nothing there. Nobody ever heard of them before.
We found no Armenians in Husanik, but there was no genocide. I mean, if there was no genocide, how come there's nobody left?
Yes, they will show us. Bir su kuyusu var mı? Su kuyusu var mı? Aşağı sağa döndüğün gibi bunun bu Rustigan Street diyor.
Orada bir çeşme var.
Sokağı varmış.
Çeşme var orada.
My father asks them about the well on the map, the well at the back of my grandmother's house.
This water well, is this still here?
The well, yeah, they are discussing where is the well. There's a woman, kadın değil mi?
Öldü.
She's dead now. In her garden, there is a well, water well, yeah.
All right. This right here is this guy. The water well is right over. It's going to show us what the water well is.
Bunlar Amerika aileleri yani büyük anneleri, büyük babaları 1890 yılında buradan gitmişler.
Okay, we'll go see.
Back in the village, my father and his sisters believe they have found the location of their grandmother Ahavni Rastigian's family home.
That could be it. This is the well.
This is the well.
Maybe this is your place.
We're sort of standing on ground that's very close.
10 gün var ki tezkere alır. Jandarma.
At this point, one of the oldest women in the village approaches and explains that she has lived across the street her whole life.
They said she's more than 100 years old. She doesn't remember her own age.
Can you ask her if she remembers anybody named Rastigian?
Sen buradaki eskilerden hiç isim hatırlıyor musun isimlerini? Bu Amerika'ya neye göçenlerden?
She doesn't.
No, she
O
doesn't.
Agop'tan Kirko. İki kardeşlermiş o kahvenin şeyinde. O arka hep onlar.
Yeah.
Böyle nurun içinde yatırlar. Taşları, toprakları nur dolar.
She said, I was very poor and neighbors, they always shared their food
Oğlum
with
askerden
her.
geldi.
Now she's praying. Her son, he broke his legs. They also helped when he was at home with the broken leg.
Böyle nurda yatırlar.
Now she's praying for them. She said she's still praying.
For that family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shall we go?
Over the next few days, my father and his sisters locate 2 more of our family villages, each more devastated than the last. My great-grandfather's village of Habusi is completely underwater, flooded as part of a massive hydroelectric project known as the Keban Dam. The trip left many questions unanswered for my dad and his sisters.
When Armenians go to Turkey, everything looks familiar. And we know what the food is. We like the food. We know what the music is about. We like the music. The people look like they're relatives of ours. It's not an unfamiliar place.
The most moving thing were the children. again, very familiar. I mean, they look like our kids. They really do. Beautiful round faces, beautiful eyes.
Children are precious. They're so precious. Giving us flowers.
Kids were bringing us flowers and holding our hands. You do feel very connected to not only the place, but to the people even. And that's also a little confusing.
The conflict you find yourself in when you go there is that you're saying, how can these people be so gracious? And I know the deeds that were perpetrated here. How could this be the same people?
For Armenian families like mine, the greatest frustration is the failure of the rest of the world to recognize the genocide. The U.S. House recently approved a resolution to formally acknowledge the World War I killings as genocide. But when Turkey threatened to shut down its Interlook air base, through which the U.S. sends 70% of its air cargo into Iraq, the government backed down.
We all deeply regret the tragic suffering of the Armenian people that began in 1915. This resolution is not the right response to these historic mass killings.
Because of their location, they literally can get away with murder.
They do.
Now, the outrage of this is stronger than ever. 100 years later, it's not going to stop until history's corrected.
There's much more to explore on our website. Discuss the world and tell us what you think of our stories from a small planet at pbs.org/frontlineworld.